The wind howled across the northern frontier like an animal too long chained, its cry carrying over the frozen ridges and white-blanketed valleys that divided the living from the forgotten. In that endless snow, a man rode alone, a cowboy by shape and shadow, his hat pulled low, his coat stiff with frost, his eyes the color of winter steel. His name was Cole Drayton, and though no one in those parts remembered when he first arrived, they all remembered the silence he carried, the kind that felt heavier than a loaded gun. The horse beneath him, a dun-colored gelding, snorted steam into the cold air as they followed a barely visible trail, through pine and drift, somewhere beyond those trees, past the creek that had frozen into white glass, was a cabin said to belong to a Russian widow, a woman who came from across the sea and never spoke much, who worked her land alone and buried her heart with the man she'd lost years ago. Cole didn't know why his path turned that way. Maybe it was the rumor of her bread baked in a wood stove, or maybe it was something else, a restlessness that had nothing to do with hunger or warmth. The day had grown dim and blue when he saw the smoke rising, thin as breath from a chimney tucked against the slope. Snow muffled every sound as he dismounted, boots sinking deep, the ache of travel in his knees. He could smell the faint sweetness of burning birch before he saw her, standing by the fence, wrapped in a dark shawl, her face pale against the dusk. She didn't move when he approached, only watched, eyes deep and unreadable as ice over water. "Evening," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The word hung between them like a cold blade. She didn't answer. The only sound was the moan of the wind and the soft creak of the cabin shutter. Cole tipped his hat, a half apology or maybe habit. "Didn't mean to startle you. I was riding toward the ridge. Storm's coming. Figured to ask if there's shelter nearby." She still said nothing, only turned her head slightly, a strand of black hair falling across her cheek. Then, in an accent soft as candle smoke, she spoke. "Storm will not pass soon," she said. "If you go, you will freeze." Her English was careful, like every word had weight. Cole studied her, noting the hard work in her hands, the faded silver ring on her finger, the way she stood and proud but tired. "Then maybe I'll wait it out," he said. "Got a tent, a fire roll, but it's cold enough to make a man think twice." Her gaze flicked to his horse, to the snow caked on his coat, and then back to his face. "There is barn," she said quietly. "For horse, but you should not come inside." He blinked. "Ma'am?" "The cabin," she said. "It is not for guests." The way she said it wasn't cruel, but final, like a prayer or a warning. Cole nodded slowly, a small smile cutting through the roughness of his jaw. "Understood." He led his horse toward the barn, the door heavy and warped. Inside it smelled of straw and cold iron. He brushed the snow from his coat and rubbed down the gelding, his hands stiff but steady. Outside, the light dimmed to gray. Through a crack in the boards, he could see her moving, feeding chickens, checking the line of wood stacked against the wall. Something about her rhythm drew him in. She moved like someone who had made peace with loneliness, though it never stopped haunting her. When he finished, he built a small fire near the barn door and sat beside it. Palms stretched toward the warmth. The storm arrived just as she said, thick flakes spinning wild through the dark. From where he sat, he could hear the faint strains of a humming voice coming from the cabin, an old tune that didn't belong to these lands, the kind you'd hear by candlelight in another life. He didn't understand the words, but the sound wrapped around him, softening something that had been hard for too long. As the night deepened, his thoughts wandered to the line she'd drawn. "You should not come inside." It wasn't pride, he realized. It was fear, the kind that builds after too much loss. He knew that kind too well. The snow thickened until the world vanished into white. Wind clawed through the trees, screaming against the shutters of the small cabin, and Cole Drayton realized that the thin fire outside would not last the night. His fingers, already numb, tightened on the blanket around his shoulders, as the flames bent low and hissed, out beneath the weight of falling ice. For a while he tried to wait, listening to the gelding shift restlessly in the stall, but the cold crept through leather and skin and bone until even breathing hurt. He cursed softly, the sound lost in the storm. Through the blur of snow he could see a square of faint gold, her window, glowing like a heartbeat against the dark. He told himself he'd only knock, asked to sit by the hearth for a moment, maybe even outside the door if she feared company. But something deeper than reason tugged him toward that light, the same way a dying man turns toward warmth. When he reached her porch, the steps were buried in drift. He stamped the snow from his boots and hesitated. Inside, he heard the slow crackle of a fire and the rustle of someone moving, careful and alone. He raised a gloved hand and knocked. Once silence, then the door creaked open a few inches, just enough for him to see her face in the lamplight, pale, alert, the shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "I told you," she whispered, voice trembling with both fear and something unspoken. "Please, don't come inside." Her eyes searched, his like she expected him to vanish. If she looked too long, Cole lowered his hand. "Ma'am, I ain't here to cause trouble," he said quietly. "Fire died. I'll freeze out there." The wind roared, blowing snow through the gap between them. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she sighed, a sound of surrender and memory tangled together, and pushed the door wider. "Only until storm sleeps," she said. "Then you go." He nodded once, stepping into the narrow room. Heat struck him like a revelation. Not much, but enough to make his knees weak. The cabin was small, built from rough logs and softened by her touch. A table covered with a linen cloth, a samovar gleaming near the hearth, a few painted icons hanging crooked on the wall. The scent of bread and smoke filled the air. She moved around him with guarded grace, placing another log on the fire. When she turned, the flames caught the copper in her hair, and for the first time he saw her not as a stranger, but as a woman who had carried both beauty and sorrow too long to separate them. "You have name?" she asked without looking at him. "Cole Drayton," he replied. "And yours?" "Elena." The name sounded like snow melting on stone. He repeated it softly, almost reverently, before catching himself. She gave a faint smile that disappeared as quickly as it came. "You ride alone, Mr. Drayton?" "Always have." "That is a hard life." He shrugged. "Sometimes the road's easier than staying still." She didn't answer, but he saw understanding in her eyes. The wind rattled the windows again, making the lamplight dance across the walls. She poured tea from the samovar into a chipped cup and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. The brief touch burned more than the fire. Neither spoke of it, yet the silence between them changed, no longer empty, but charged with all the things neither dared name. He watched her move about the cabin, graceful even in weariness, and something inside him softened, dangerous and new. He set the cup down carefully. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "Must get mighty quiet." Her eyes lifted to his, steady now. "Quiet can be mercy," she said. "Noise reminds me of what is gone." Cole nodded slowly. He knew that truth better than he wished. They stood like that for a long time, the storm screaming outside, while inside, the air grew heavy with warmth, and words unsaid. Then she stepped back, drawing the shawl tighter. "You may sleep near fire," she murmured. "When light comes, you ride." He wanted to answer, to tell her he meant no harm, that something in her voice had already found a home in him. But he saw the wall in her gaze and respected it. He spread his bedroll near the hearth and lay down, staring at the ceiling beams. She moved to a small corner, sat by the window, and began to mend a tear in her shawl, her fingers trembling slightly. The only sound was the ticking of heat in the stove and the faint rhythm of their breathing. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, something fragile and alive flickered in the stillness, a warmth neither of them had expected or trusted. Cole watched her shadow move across the wall, and for the first time in years, the loneliness inside him eased. He didn't sleep for a long while. He just listened to the wind die slowly against the cabin walls, knowing that when morning came, nothing between them would be quite the same. Dawn came quietly, like a secret the world was afraid to share. The storm had died in the night, leaving the land wrapped in silver stillness. Every tree bowed under weight of snow. Cole opened his eyes to the pale light spilling through the frosted window, the scent of smoke and warm bread curling in the air. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he saw her, Elena, kneeling by the stove, her shawl fallen to her shoulders, hair unbraided and wild in the soft light. She hadn't seen him wake. Her face was gentler in the morning, almost young again, though the lines of old sorrow lingered like faint scars. He sat up quietly, not wanting to startle her. The wooden floor creaked under his hand, and she turned. Startled at first, then calm. "You slept," she said, voice still low from the night. "Barely," he admitted. "Too much beauty outside to waste on dreams." She gave a small, incredulous smile. "Beauty?" she repeated. "Only snow and cold," he shrugged. "Maybe, but a man sees different when he's warm for once." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something neither had the courage to name. She turned away quickly, tending the bread. "You can eat," she said after a moment. "Then you go." The words were soft, but the last two carried the weight of walls she'd built around her heart. Cole rose slowly, his joints stiff from the cold floor. "Didn't mean to overstay, ma'am," he said gently. "Just figured I'd help clear the roof or feed your stock before I ride out." "Owe you that much?" Elena hesitated. Gratitude flickered across her face, tempered by mistrust. "You owe nothing. You live." "That is enough." He smiled faintly, pulling on his gloves. "Well, I reckon helping gives a man something to do with living." She didn't stop him when he stepped outside, only watched through the window as he shoveled snow from the roof, repaired the sagging gate, and broke the ice in the water trough. The gelding stamped and snorted, eager to move, but Cole worked slow, thoughtful, his breath rising like smoke in the cold air. From inside, Elena's eyes followed him, and memories she'd buried for years stirred. Memories of her husband, of a life built with laughter and hands that knew tenderness. She pressed her palm to the window pane, feeling the faint trace of warmth from inside. When he finally came back to the porch, his face red from cold and effort, she opened the door without a word and handed him a cup of tea. Steam curled between them, and for a long moment they simply stood there, listening to the faint drip of melting snow from the eaves. "You are not like others," she said quietly. "Most men do not stop for storms. They take what they want and go." Cole's eyes darkened, thoughtful. "Maybe I used to be that kind," he said. "Ain't proud of it. The trail takes a man apart piece by piece. Hard to remember what it's like to stay still long enough to care." "And now?" she asked. He looked past her to the fire glowing inside the cabin. "Now I remember what warm feels like. That's dangerous." Her breath caught, though she tried to hide it. He stepped closer, the boards of the porch creaking beneath his boots. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "This is home, even if it keeps you lonely." "Lonely is safer than broken again." Her voice trembled on the last word, and he knew she hadn't meant to say it. He reached out, slow, almost without thinking, and brushed a snowflake from her sleeve. She froze but didn't pull away. The small touch sent a quiet shiver through the air. "Sometimes," he said, his voice a rough whisper, "a thing already. Broken just needs someone who won't mind the cracks." For a heartbeat, she met his gaze, the raw honesty in it undoing her. Then she stepped back, her hand tightening on the door. "You should go before road melts and traps you," she said. He nodded, though something in him resisted. "I'll ride," he said. "But if I pass this way again—" She looked up sharply, cutting him off. "Do not promise what cannot be kept." He studied her face, memorizing the mix of defiance and fear, the fragility beneath. "Wasn't a promise," he murmured. "Just truth." Then he turned, saddled his horse, and mounted. The world glittered with ice, sky washed in pale gold. He didn't look back until he reached the ridge. And when he did, she was standing by the fence, shawl whipping in the wind, watching him ride away. She thought he couldn't see her tears, but the sunlight caught them, turning them to silver. He touched the brim of his hat in silent farewell before disappearing into the horizon. Yet neither knew that fate had already begun weaving them together, that the storm he left behind was only the first of many still to come. As the lonely cowboy disappeared into the white horizon and the Russian widow stood, frozen by her fence, neither knew their hearts had already chosen a path neither storm nor distance could erase. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because in Chapter 2, when Cole returns to the widow's cabin, the truth of what they both feared will finally come to light. Stay with us for Please Don't Come Inside, Chapter 2, The Storm Returns.